Hello, and welcome back to another conversation that we're having with the team here at Advanced Powder Dynamics. I'm Steven. We have Will, Hendrik, and Uli. If each of you want to introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about what you do specifically, it'll give a little bit of perspective on what your answers are going to be coming at them from.
Sure, I'll start. It's Will West. I'm the co founder and CEO of Tesseract Life Sciences. Tesseract Life Sciences owns three operating units. It's Advanced Powder Dynamics, which is here with you today, as well as Biotest, which is our global distributor of our proprietary ingredients, which are largely manufactured at Advanced Powder Dynamics, as well as owner of Tesseract Medical Research, which is our finished products business.
Great. I'll go next. I'm Uli Lindauer. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Tesseract Life Sciences, and I oversee consumer and customer facing communication strategy, branding for our operating entities that Will just listed. And I'm working very closely with Advanced Powder Dynamics, which is our production and operating unit in terms of all things that are outside facing.
Good morning. I'm Hendrik Grobler, and I am responsible for technical sales and business development on the Advanced Powder Dynamics side. I am basically the first responder for any customer inquiries or any new product development or tool manufacturing inquiries from customers.
Awesome.
It's interesting that you use the term first responder, Hendrik, because sometimes we have customers come to us and they're in dire straits, and the first responder is absolutely what they need.
That's
Absolutely.
That's honestly, I think that that's a really good kind of tie into what we're going to be talking about today, which is scaling from R&D to commercial production. So I imagine people are probably calling you guys up sometimes and trying to make that happen quite quickly. So the first question that we have for today is when a company has a new powder formulation that works in their lab, what does the path actually look like to get it into a commercial production? And what are the stages?
Okay, I'll start with that one. The complete process from lab evaluation and formulation development to full commercialization is not only critical for achieving success and customer objectives, but it requires experienced teams and well-established collaborative team efforts and trial and tested processes and procedures. It also requires clear and well-defined customer objectives, such as powder properties, required delivery systems, regulatory requirements, customers' projected volumes, yield expectations, and so forth. APD has developed a robust and comprehensive, but also a very efficient product development process that includes basically 4 steps or 4 levels. We have applied this process to more than 300 successful product development and commercialization projects through the last, I would say, 10 years. So after the lab work is completed and we have an agreed upon formulation or formulations that we want to take to the next step, what is that next step? It's what we refer to pilot scale dryer trials. 2 important notes that I do want to mention here. The first one is APD do not use desktop dryers for the initial drying trials. That requires, translation from the specific desktop dryer to our technology or to conventional spray drying technology or to scaled units. We have a pilot scale dynamic atomization dryer that represents our own unique drying and atomization technology. So we can scale dryer settings and run conditions up directly from this pilot scale drying trials to the next level dryer without making any assumptions towards, settings, pressures, temperatures, and so forth. The second thing that's also very important for customers to know is that we are very transparent in the way that we handle these dryer trials. So we always invite customers to attend these pilot scale dryer trials. It gives them the opportunity to see how we conduct these trials, how we achieve their specific objectives, and they learn the technology, and they get to know the team, and that they are going to work with in future. And that includes our whole team. So whether it's logistics or the R&D department or quality, we involved everybody so that they know the team, and so that they know who they're going to deal with going forward. So these trials are focused on a couple of things. First, it is the liquid handling side. So we look at the equipment required for the liquid. We look at viscosities. We look at the formulation required. We look at the sequence of the formulation. So we're in the process now of developing the procedures and the processes for batching, for formulation, and for creating a stable and homogeneous feed product. From a dryer perspective, we would look at the feed solids concentration and how we feed that into the dryer and how that would atomize. So viscosities are very important. And then because our dynamic atomization technology allows us to handle higher solids concentration than, in general from conventional spray drying, we start looking at feed solids optimization also. And then depending on the specific customer requirements with regards to flowability, solubility, density requirements, what are the delivery systems at the end of the day? Are there specific requirements with regards to particle size distribution, handling of fines? So when we start with the dryer itself, we look at the run settings, we look at the run conditions, and we look at the basic process parameters that we are going to evaluate for the next steps. And that is the inlet temperatures, the outlet temperatures, and then atomization pressures and atomization, the kinetic energy that we put into the atomization. We look at different nozzle configurations, spray patterns, and then specifically we start evaluating particle size or particle engineering in general. What is required from different nozzle configurations, different type of nozzles, the spray patterns, the droplet size that we have to create. So it's an intense exercise, but very focused and very objective focused. We won't do anything unless we know exactly what the customer objectives are with regards to every single particle property and particle characteristic requirements. I can also add that we have a full equipped lab right next to our R&D facility, which gives us the ability to do, in process or in real-time evaluation. So we can do on-the-fly adjustments. If we run the product in the dryer and we see that the moisture specification is out of spec or the particle size distribution is not in specification, we can immediately evaluate that in the lab and look at the particle characteristics and then do on-the-fly adjustments on the dryer to achieve these specific objectives. And then the last thing is that we would create powder samples for the customer for their own evaluation. So we not only send the customer a full report on the powder characteristics and properties that we achieved. We don't only give them information with regards to challenges that we experienced and how we've overcome these challenges, whether it's fines or conveyance of the product or yields, maybe I would say, minor formulation adjustments. We also give them powder samples for their own evaluation. And then we have really good communication with the customer. So there would be a back and forth before we go to the next step where we evaluate, what we have achieved and what their evaluation from the powder property and characteristic sides are. And then we would discuss, okay, what are we going to do for the next step?
I have I'm going to try something here, Stephen. I actually have a chart that outlines this development process that Hendrik just spoke about. I'm going to share this and see if it works.
Okay, yeah.
Hold on. Hendrik, maybe you can go back and just kind of, or I can do it in terms of, so this process begins with very clear requirement definition in step one,
Hmm.
including all the details that Hendrik just mentioned. And then the product goes onto the Dynamic Atomization 5 spray dryer, which is a R&D slash small scale unit where all these real-time changes can be made.
Hmm.
Once that's validated and approved from the customer, it goes onto our next size dryer, which is the DA50 dryer, to confirm consistent particle size, flowability, morphology, all the elements that Hendrik just mentioned. And once that is passed and approved by the internal team as well as by the customer, this project will then go into scale up, which is a large scale dryer. It's 100 times bigger than our R&D little pilot dryer. Then it's ready for full scale production. And
Wow.
then you see here steps 5 and 6, which really go into final quality assurance testing. We confirm all the requirements, and then it's implemented with custom packaging and documentation and goes to the customer.
Yeah, that's
You
a
know,
really, really helpful graph there.
so what's interesting about this, Stephen, is I think, two key points. First of all, what Hendrik and Uli have outlined here is the stages in the process, but also that it's very well defined. And as you point out, there are a lot of questions. People want to know exactly how does this work? How does it flow through from the lab or the bench top all the way through to commercialization, which is one of the most, I would say, common questions we get. People always want to know, what are the steps, what's it going to be like, because they want to project through all the way to the finish line, which is a logical thing to try to understand. I think one of the most important questions that's on everyone's mind, but they're a little sometimes shy to ask, is when is the right time to come to APD, to start this discussion? And embedded in that is, what's the competition doing? Well, they come to us because we've done hundreds of projects. We're the experts. We've done projects in virtually every industry with all sorts of challenges and all sorts of ingredients, etc. Your question was about, if a company has a powder formulation that works in their lab, but 80 to 90% of the time, that's not how things start. They don't have a powder formulation that works in their lab. 80 to 90% of the time, they might have an idea, or they might have a liquid, or they might have a challenge, something's broken,
Hmm.
but there is no powder formulation that works in their lab. And that's exactly why they're coming to us. And so maybe they have an extract, or they just have a concept, or they see an opportunity in the market, but it's actually at a much earlier stage, which is why our process is so well defined, even pre-benchtop, pre-lab work, helping understand what objective are they trying to meet. And there's no bad ideas, particularly working with a business like ours, which has executed hundreds of engagements with hundreds of clients. We have the absolute best context to engage as a partner with these prospective clients and help them through the situation. But we often hear, this product is broken, or our process is broken, or can your equipment do this? Because it seems like an insurmountable challenge, or no one has done it in their industry or any industry before. But that's precisely why we are almost always having even our first discussion under NDA, because it's a very sensitive discussion. It's something that they absolutely want to know what the competition is doing, or if something is feasible. But it's a very sensitive discussion that we're having, maybe about something that they're already working on or failed in their efforts to work on it. But they see a great opportunity in the market if they can only find the right partner to help them get it out there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I remember, I think semi recently, we were even talking about a client where, um, without any real specifics, I mean, you're talking with people, well, their raw materials still in the ground while you're actually even talking to them about the development of what you're going to be doing with that and how you're actually going to be putting that out there and what that's going to be going into. So I think it's important for the people to know that, yeah, that they can come to you guys pretty much at any point.
I think it would be beneficial for potential customers that listen to this to just take one step backwards and dig into the details of each step a little bit more, so that they understand what the intensity are and how we achieve specific objectives. The customers that we deal with 99% of the time has very specific objectives with regards to their product. It's high value products with these specific requirements. And how do we achieve that for customers at different scales? Uli mentioned the D50 dryer as a second step, which is 100% correct. So I want to just discuss that in a little more detail, so customers know what our focus areas are with every step. So the second step is where we actually start optimization and process engineering. And this is where R&D meets the engineers. And we start looking at scalable process conditions. We look at different equipment requirements that directly resembles commercial scale equipment. We look at explosion risk and mitigation, powder recovery systems and processes. So it's important to not only look at the powder properties and characteristics that customers want. We want to focus on yield. How does the product convey through the system, and how does it behave over longer times? There's a difference between running 1 hour on a small scale dryer and running 6 hours on a mid scale dryer, or running 16 to 24 hours on a full commercial dryer. So we start looking at all of these aspects and what the influence that would have on the bigger scale. At the same time, we would start looking at auxiliary equipment that's going to be required. In the liquid handling phase, we look at quality reviews and quality requirements, sanitation and cleaning strategies, and how we're going to deal with that on commercial level. And then basic things like testing requirements, sampling requirements, line clearance, regulatory requirements, raw material requirements. For example, is it non-GMO? Is it kosher? Is it halal? And then we look at the batch sizes and the procedures required. Is the sequence for the batching, heating, cooling requirements, viscosity influences, and so forth. So it's a very complex process that we go through, where we actually involve not only the R&D team, but we bring in the engineers, we bring in the technical team to look at the equipment, and we start bringing in quality also to look at quality requirements with regards to cleaning and sanitation, labeling requirements, and so forth. So it's a very complex and very detailed process that we go through. And the objective is to ensure that when we get to this, the full commercial level, that we do not run into any unforeseen issues or problems. And then the is a pre-commercial demonstration trial run. And that is where we take what we've learned on the optimization trials, and now we run just for longer time. So we have extended the run times to determine process stability, powder conveyance through extended run times. We look at the consistency of the product, and we look at process optimizations. We look at batch sizes. We look at the runtime optimization. Formulation requirements are very specific and needs to be done in a very specific sequence. Otherwise, you're not going to have the same and homogeneous feed material every time. And then we also look at, final validation of all the processes with the customer. We look at commercial viability, and then we start looking at, pricing with regards to, batching involved. Is there any raw material requirements from our side? Is the customer going to supply the raw materials, and packaging requirements and so forth? So we focus on making sure that we are prepared for full commercialization before we go into that process. And like Uli mentioned, the final process is then full commercial campaigns. And at this stage, we have finalized, the contract manufacturing agreement or the tolling agreements. We had the final agreements on the specifications and procedures in place. The customer understands 100% what are the specifications, what are the procedures. We are now implementing the SOPs that we have defined and during the optimization trial. So whether that is powder properties like solubility, how do we measure solubility? Did we agree on that SOP and the procedure for solubility so that we have that and that we agreed on that? The same with things like moisture content in the powder, flowability. How do you measure flowability, solubility? How do we deal with fines? How do we focus on yields, and how do we optimize yields? So I think the final thing that I can mention is that this is a never-ending process. It's not that we went through step 1 through 4 and now we're at full commercialization and now we just run the product for the customer every single time. We always have to improve. We always have to improve efficiency, consistency. We will always attempt to optimize yield and to ensure, better throughput. We assess things like seasonable variability, is there humidity constraints. We look at raw material variability and consistency. And there is a consistent communication process that we have with the customer before every campaign to review what we've achieved the previous time, were there any challenges, and how can we improve with regards to all of these things that I've mentioned. Optimizing yield every time, optimizing product performance, reviewing product performance. How can we improve the product? And then maybe we can go back to step 4 or step 3. If the customer has some powder property requirement changes, or, hey, I have a different application for this product. How can we address that? Maybe a slight density changement or a moisture content changement. So we continuously go through the process to ensure that we always optimize and always focus on achieving better results.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I think even just the combination of all of your guys' answers, it really shows how thorough the process is. But no, I think those were really, really great distinctions. Moving on to the next question, I think that some of this was answered, I think, within your specific process, but I think going to the whole industry, if you could speak on what are the most common things that break when you try to scale to spray drying process what are the most common things that break when you try to scale to a spray drying process from a small R&D batch to a full production run? And again, I think you guys talked about it a little bit actually quite in depth in terms of how you mitigate that, but maybe if you could go into some of the pitfalls that may happen if you weren't quite so thorough with your process.
Yeah, I had to think about this a little bit. What can break? When you deal with processes and equipment, there's always the possibility that something can break from a equipment perspective. The unfortunate truth is that not everything that works on pilot scale or scaled up scales works on full production scale. This is where experience and expertise are required to mitigate the unknown and the unforeseen factors. And typically, it's a size and time issues. It's easy to run a small batch in a small vessel with a small mixer than running a 10x scale up version of that batch with bigger equipment, bigger mixers. And now that material sits in that same feed vessel, not for 2 or 3 hours, but for 16 to 24 hours. And what can happen with that material? Bigger batches, is longer heating time, longer cooling time. Larger batches is, longer holding time. So what happens with that material over that, 8 to 16 hours or even to 24 hours while it's sitting in that batch waiting to be dried? What are the shear factor influences, of the mixers that you are using? What are the thickening potential of the material and the viscosity changes in the material over that extended periods of time? And how would that viscosity changes influence the product, from the first hour that you started running the material and you chief inspect material, but after 16 hours, you are feeding a different viscosity material, or the material settled out because it was not proper mixing, and now you have different powder or particle size. So these are the things that you learn through experience and through proper scale-up procedures and processes, so that you can mitigate these unforeseen things that's not always possible to know, but you have to be able to foresee that these things could happen, and then how you're going to address that. So we have, experience, more than 20 years experience with scale-up demonstrations. We have already completed 3 successful scale-up demonstrations just in Q1 of this year. Important is real-time data collection and evaluation, keeping a record of any variables and creating operating parameters. If the operator have parameters that he can operate within, and he knows that, yes, there is variability in viscosity, there's variability in particle size distribution, how do you operate within those parameters? And our dynamic atomization technology that we have allows for that. We can operate within very narrow parameters and achieve in-specification product without, the concern that these unknown factors could influence the process. And I think that is what's really important, is that you should always have the parameters that you can work within. You should always have the information that you can evaluate and go back to. I would say a typical example is if you have a low salts concentration feed material, and you know that it's going to take time. If you have, say, 10% feed salts concentration material, it's going to take a longer time for you to actually produce powder, and then you can evaluate that powder. If you have an 80% feed salts concentration material, you're going to see powder very quickly in the process and at the powder collection. So you can do quick evaluations. If it's low solids, it's not that easy. So how do you do that? You do that through experience and through information. The operator should know that this is a 10% feed solids concentration material. The first hour of this process or this drying, we're going to see low recovery rates, maybe 20% recovery rate. And don't go into a panic state. We know that is going to creep up. We're still coating the process. We know that the material is conveying through the system slowly. There's some that's going to the bag out, so we're coating the filter bags in the process. But you monitor the system, and you'll see hour 2 now it's 60% recovery rate. Hour 3, 80% recovery rate. Hour 4, 90% recovery rate, and those are the operating parameters that I'm referring to. If you run a high solids concentration material and you have 20% recovery rate in the first hour, then you should panic, right? Because now something is wrong. Fortunately, we know that, through the process that we just explained, the scale-up trials, the optimization trials, the pre-commercialization run, we know that we've already addressed these issues, and we know that we looked at, extended run times, conveyance, and how the material would behave over time. So we do not have these challenges at that point when we do go into full production.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it seems like, obviously within how detailed and how defined you guys are with your process, that seems like a process that that you guys are taking those thorough steps to make sure of that. You mentioned, and we'll just go through this really briefly because this was my question. Maybe this even is a question for Uli or Will from more of almost like the client perspective of working with a spray dryer. But you mentioned before that you guys don't use like desktop dryers that are different from process than your actual full scale production. You guys use an actual scaled down version, but of the same exact process. That seems like an important differentiator that not everyone uses, if I'm getting that information correctly. Could you again really briefly talk about maybe some of the ways that the process breaks down, scaling up from R&D to full size production, if you're not utilizing again the same type of actual dryer, same type of unit essentially, but in a scaled up manner?
Well, I think maybe I can offer a very succinct perspective on this here, because what Hendrik has given you, he's given you the nuance across all dimensions of this,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that when you go from an engineering point of view, when you go from the benchtop in the lab all the way through the stages toward into commercialization, there are a lot of pieces you touch and they can go wrong. But in a sense, one thing breaks every single time, and that is expectation. Whether you are the engineer, the project manager, the CEO, the CFO, the head of marketing, the customer, meaning the customer downstream in the channel that is our client's customer,
Yeah.
expectation is what breaks. Something that they had in their mind that they were trying to do, they thought they were going to do, they thought they knew, that turned out to be misplaced or misguided or poorly thought of because of miseducation or misrepresentation by someone else. It is expectation that breaks, and it can break for 100 different reasons. Those reasons are all traceable back to exactly the question you just asked. It's because the equipment differs from the benchtop and the lab to the R&D scale dryer, to the pilot scale dryer, to the commercial scale dryer, to the markets. And that is a problem. You want, as the brand, as the manufacturer, the consumer to get a product that is exactly the same every single time, that functions the same every single time, the product to behave in the human body or in the application that it's intended for the same every single time. So what we're able to do is we're able to engineer with our client from the very beginning an application-specific particle that meets the need of the consumer in that market segment for that application exactly the same way every single time, and is repeatable. We do that from the beginning, and because our equipment at every scale, R&D scale, pilot scale, commercial scale, is identical, but for its size, we can trace it all the way up through to the commercialization phase. And even from the time it leaves the benchtop in the lab to the first couple of hours of work in the R&D scale, at 1% of what will be commercial production scale, we can trace the economics because we're seeing the yield, we're seeing the flow rates, we're seeing the water activity, the moisture levels, etc., and we can project that out. We can project with the customer their financial plan in their business model, pricing curves, material buys, cost of goods sold, so they know what's conceivable in the market. So again, they don't have to worry about expectation breaking. We actually have a couple of key clients right now that we're working with where they came in with expectations that were way off. And in their case, it was a technical expectation. They're scientists. Great. We love working with scientists. What they didn't realize is that one molecule drawn out on paper does not equal one particle of powder when it comes out of a dryer. And so if you're working with traditional spray drying or you're working with something else, the morphology of the particles coming from other providers is agglomerated and the morphology is not ideal. So your expectations about solubility, dispersion, and other things that you would normally try to engineer for absorption in consumer products, for example, in food and beverage or in Nutra, they're very hard to achieve. They're impossible to reproduce. And so your expectations are off from the very beginning all the way through commercialization, as is your repeatability. And so that's what breaks for any number of reasons. But if you are in one market segment with one application, they're breaking for certain reasons. If you're in a different market segment with a different application, they're breaking for different reasons. But you absolutely have to find a partner who can understand that entire process, that entire engineering cycle, that entire design for manufacturing cycle, and be able to anticipate every nuance all the way through to the very end.
That makes total sense. That's a really, really interesting aspect. Even just the financials, being able to more accurately fully project out on the financial scale the whole cash flow plan of what that exact product scaling is going to look like is just so valuable. That's interesting. I think part of this kind of case study you were just bringing up with specifically calculating out even just misunderstanding the molecule versus the particle kind of goes in really well to the next question, which is how does particle behavior change at different production scales, and how do you account for that when you're engineering a powder?
Yeah, that's also a very interesting question. And I would like to answer that by first starting with our technology. And as you know by now, that APD uses a unique atomization and drying technology that's different from conventional spray drying. We technically flash dry the particle in less than a second, and that means 100% of the particle is dried within that second. In conventional spray drying, you would dry maybe 80% or 90% of the particle in that first, 2 to 3 seconds, and then the rest of the drying would happen while the particle is flowing through the drying chamber and exits the drying chamber. So there are different hotspots, different temperatures inside the drying chamber. Our drying chamber has two temperatures in. The first is the inlet temperature, and the second one is the outlet temperature. And the outlet temperature represents the temperature inside the drying chamber other than that inlet temperature where we actually atomize and dry the product. That means that the particle is not exposed to extended heat during the drying process or while it's traveling through the drying chamber. However, in a large drying chamber that's maybe 40 to 60 feet tall, the particle does take longer to exit the drying chamber than when you have a drying chamber that is 10 feet tall. So how do we address that? Our technology gives us an additional airflow that we introduce into the drying chamber that is not supporting atomization, but supports only humidity control inside the drying chamber and conveyance outside of the drying chamber. So we typically don't have these challenges that conventional spray drying have with regards to how do you account for, a particle behavior on different scales. We know that if we have addressed the basic parameters, which is the inlet temperature, the outlet temperature, and atomization energy that we put into the drying that particle, that we would achieve the same powder properties, whatever scale we use or dry that particle at.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I think that was a really interesting question that I think, funnily enough, there was so many parts of it I think that were almost touched on previously. We'll go straight on to the next question then. So, what role does pilot scale testing play, and what specific data should a company be looking for from a pilot run before committing to a full production investment? So if you could almost think of even like specific key data points, obviously with you guys, they'll get a full rundown and they'll get all the information that they need. But when somebody's going with somebody, what specific things should they be making sure that they check from a pilot run to make sure that it's actually able to scale up?
It's very important that a customer understands what those questions are that they should ask, and they do not always know that. So we support and we help the customer to determine what questions should be important and what questions they should ask. We deal with customers, anything from startups to mid-sized companies that wants to create a new product or new product line or a new formulation for a different application, or with well-established huge companies that understand exactly what they need and what they want, and they know how to answer the questions. So we have to help and support to make sure what are those questions to be asked. And it's related to the product itself, every particle characteristic or powder property requirements that is involved based on the delivery system and the application of the product. Is it moisture content? Is it water activity? Is it density, flowability, solubility, bioavailability? So there's a whole range of questions that needs to be addressed. What are the specific requirements and how are you going to achieve that? Then it is the equipment itself, and it's the ability of the technology to achieve that. And not only achieve that on pilot scale, but how do you scale that up to the next level? So what we have developed at APD is a questionnaire for the customer that they complete before we even start with these lab tests or lab evaluations, or we go to a pilot scale testing, where we have listed all the questions that they should ask and that they should expect answers to. And if they don't know the answer yet, then APD has the experience and the expertise to help them to address these questions. If you have a product that you want to use in a beverage application, solubility is important. How are we going to achieve that? If you want to put a powder in a capsule, for example, flowability and density is important. Particle size distribution is important. Consistency is important. And I think that is what we do at APD, is we ensure that both the customer and ourselves ask the questions that's supposed to be asked so that we can achieve the objectives at the end of the day for the customer.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to add here, Stephen, is that the pilot work plays an important role, not just at the piloting stage for the purposes of the things you would typically think of when you're at that stage, but it foreshadows things that are going to come later and should be used to protect the business during commercialization. And I'll give you a couple of examples. First of all, it's much more costly to have a problem during the commercialization stage when you're ramping up, or when you're at full scale, or when you're in a time of business crisis at full scale in particular, rather than it is to envision how to build flexibility into the business when you're working at the pilot scale. And many companies don't take the opportunity at little or no cost to explore these things when they're piloting. That's one of the things we help clients do. A great example of that is for companies who are in the food and the beverage and nutraceutical space. Ingredients, for example, might be the same type of ingredient, curcumin, quercetin, many others. They might even have spec sheets that look identical or nearly identical from their suppliers. But that does not mean that they're going to run the same, convey the same in the production plant. And so it's extremely important when choosing ingredients to look at multiple potential suppliers and run them on the equipment at the pilot phase to qualify not just the one supplier that you think is going to be your main supplier, but look at multiple suppliers, qualify multiple suppliers for the sake of redundancy, for the sake of insurance, so you know how they're going to perform. And make sure that the business is insulated for a time of crisis. One very concrete example, quercetin. Quercetin from multiple suppliers runs very differently on most equipment. During COVID, quercetin became extremely hard to source. For those providers who had qualified multiple quercetin suppliers, they had multiple vendors to turn to very quickly, knowing quite well which ones were going to give them not only a source of quercetin, but from those who still had quercetin available for their products, which ones were going to give them the best yield in the manufacturing environment. Those who never bothered to qualify multiple vendors and run them on the equipment at the pilot phase had no idea whether or not the quercetin they were going to source and run would give them anything more than 60-70% yield, where they might have been used to 95-97% yield in the manufacturing environment. So they might have been able to get the product, but they were going to be paying 2 or 3 times as much for it, and then they might have found out that their yield was going to drop 30 or 40% as well. That can be catastrophic financially just to try to keep product in the market. So the piloting phase is not just important to move through to commercialization. It gives you flexibility at commercialization to avoid troubleshooting retroactively, but it also gives you the visibility to make the right decision in times of crisis.
Yeah, no, that kind of foresight, I think, is as you said, it's not even just of utmost importance. Sometimes it could be the cause for dire situations if you don't do that. That's a really, really great thing to point out, I think, for a lot of companies.
Yeah, so just real quick, one of the things that I should express here is, I mentioned, and so people are going to ask me to justify this after the fact. I should put it in the recording now. How do you do that cost effectively? Well, if we're doing, one shift evaluating things in a pilot run, we'll simply batch multiple ingredients and run each one for 90 minutes. We can run several over the course of one shift. It's as easy to run several ingredients over the course of one shift during the pilot phase to test suppliers as it is to dedicate that shift to one supplier. I mean, we're going to set aside the time for the partner anyhow. We'd prefer to run and test multiple suppliers for them when we're testing ingredients on the platform.
That's really interesting, because I do think that is a really important aspect to include, because even in other industries, even in other vending situations, the idea of having redundancies almost does seem like a luxury for a lot of people. The idea of having backups, or the idea of having redundancy, or the idea of having an extra vendor here or there just in case, seems like a luxury, I think, that a lot of people would assume would be very costly to make sure of. So that's really awesome that you guys are able to actually do that.
What that does as well is give you multiple suppliers that you can assure have good products, and then make sure that they're bidding against each other if that's feasible for the financial benefits long term.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. That's a really cool thing you guys are able to do. Moving forward to the next question. So how long does a typical scale-up engagement take from first conversation to delivering commercial product? And what are the biggest factors that speed it up or slow it down?
From my experience, Stephen, I can tell you that we have seen anything recently 6 weeks from the first lab evaluation through to optimization, the 4 steps that we just explained that we go through, to the first production run, a minimum of 6 weeks. And then the longest was 3 years. And we accommodate each customer and each customer's objectives and time frame requirements. Although we have a very robust process, we can do that in 6 weeks. It is possible. So from APD's perspective, we work with the customer and we look at their objectives and their requirements. What are the biggest factors that speed this up or slow this down? It is it a brand new product? Is there market development involved? Is it there shelf life studies that needs to be done? Is there additional post-drying development work that needs to be done? Like, what is the delivery system? Does this need to go into capsules? Does it need to go into a gummy, stick packs? And then what are the challenges, the post-drying challenges that the customer have to go through? And these things can slow down a product. And then if there are issues with any of the particle property requirements like density or particle size, and it does not behave very well with the post-drying equipment, then do we have to review that, and do we have to make adjustments to the powder properties? So those things can influence that. Most of the times, we know that if we have determined the objectives and we know what the powder properties should be and we know what the delivery system is going to be, then we can mitigate these factors that will slow down the process. But there are always challenges, and from APD's side, we have the ability to accommodate these things and help the customer to get the product, to full commercialization at the time that they require.
That is
I'd like to add something here, Stephen, because for many, many years I was on the customer side
yeah.
of various manufacturing companies. And I think one of the things I'd like to point out here is the flip side of this particular timeline. So when a customer approaches us with a project or we take on a project, it's important that the customer keep in mind that the time that their company needs internally for sample approval, decision making, that all in some way, shape, or form plays into not the APD timeline, but into the total development timeline for this product. So, for example, if a turnaround, powder evaluation, and a approval can happen within 48 to 72 hours, 6 weeks is absolutely doable. If it requires an executive committee approval, if it involves potential focus groups on the customer side to have, their ultimate user input, then it will take longer. I think that's very important to keep in mind because these timelines are fantastic until you deal with the reality of corporation schedules, corporations traveling, their teams might not be available. So that's point one. Point two, which is on the very, very, very beginning stages of a development process, is the speed with which the customer can provide raw materials to Advanced Powder Dynamics also is very important. So if the customer approaches us and has a particular project in mind, but that particular project this material will not be available or produced for another month or 2 months,
Yeah.
or it has to get shipped in from a different geographic area. Those things, of course, will then play quite a significant role in the total time. Like for me, from the marketing and strategy side, yes, the development process is interesting and all of that, but it's the speed to market or the go-to market total timeline from when do we have the idea and get the idea approved to when can I have this in the hands of my consumers. So those things play a big role.
And I think a really interesting aspect of that you brought up with corporate timelines, with approvals, with different schedules of teams, I think even when Hendrik was mentioning from 6 weeks, I think my eyebrows raised a little bit and I was like, oh wow, that's very expedient. And then when he said that the longest was 3 years, my eyebrows, my eyes got really big. I saw it in the actual recording. I was like, oh no. But I think you automatically hear that and you think, oh wow, what went wrong with that kind of thought with that process. But I think when you point out those aspects of it, it almost flips that, and it almost now seems as though, oh wow, that's really amazing what you guys have done with the versatility of your team, that you're able to create the space depending on what a client needs, because, a client that does need market testing, focus groups, different approvals, different optimizations, and does truthfully, a lot of the time, the larger teams from the marketing perspective, in my experience, those larger corporate teams, they almost need to see the evolution of something,
Yeah.
go through it, where smaller teams might be a little bit more agile and decisive and say, hey, you know what, we know what we want, it's this. Okay, here's the change we need to make, let's do it. A larger team almost needs to be able to see that evolution for them to properly build the marketing team around it, build what the PR is going to be around it, have their packaging really honed in, have these processes. And the fact that you guys are able to accommodate that, I think, is honestly really important for some of these larger contracts. Likely.
Yeah. And in addition to, size, it also goes back to the requirements, right? So, for example, if we are talking about a specialty medical food for children
Mm,
versus making this up, a powder dried broccoli for something,
hmm
then, the criteria become a little bit different because, if you have a child with a metabolic condition, or not in the prescription business or the pharma business, but you are getting pretty close because there's a lot of concern on the parent side, on the consumer side. What does this? So those specifications are extremely precise and they are very, very, very well defined. So that's another thing that, to keep in mind, the complexity of the actual project parameters also plays a big role. If I come and I say, can you spray dry, 500 liters of powdered broccoli that is in liquid, that is different from, talking about a medical food for children or a supplement that has very specific, let's say, applications in the naturopathic health area.
yeah. No, and that makes total sense, honestly.
Yeah, I would say that if you plotted all of our projects to understand the speed with which certain things were commercialized, the primary driver is going to be the culture of the client, and the secondary driver is going to be the nature of the project, as Uli points out.
Hmm.
And I think for any company that's out there that's looking to engage in something like this, the way to understand whether or not the partner or partners they're considering are the right partners is simply to ask a couple questions. Ask what a business, in this case a business like ours, it does to support it. The first thing that Tesseract did when we entered into this business with APD was we doubled the R&D capacity. We wanted to be able to serve twice as many companies, projects, ideas, opportunities as we felt the business was able at the time, which was already considerable capacity. But we doubled our throughput with the R&D machinery and dynamic atomization technology we had at that smallest level. So we actually have two R&D production lines. We can run multiple projects simultaneously every day.
Hmm.
So that wide end of the funnel, when we leap from benchtop and design in the lab to the production environment, we now have parallel teams operating every day. The second thing that we did was we took the entire factory setup from one shift to two. So as things move from that small scale R&D and piloting phase all the way through commercialization, we have doubled with an opportunity to triple our capacity there as well. That shows our commitment to the resources and how serious we are to make speed and throughput a reality for the customers who really need it. So our commitment is visible, and that's as much as we can do. I think the rest is up to the customers, and we move at their speed. And so that's the type of thing that I would encourage other businesses to look for.
And I do think, even just going back to the very beginning of that kind of comment, is interesting because you put it in terms of the first most most driving factor, or the largest driving factor of this being the client culture, and placing more importance on that aspect of it because you guys are so versatile. I think that does show a testament to that you guys are putting client and and their experience kind of first, which is a big deal. I don't think every company does that.
No, it is important because that goes back to the expectation management that Will was talking about earlier. Any kind of development project, be it here in our, spray drying, dynamic atomization, it doesn't matter. It could be any kind of development project. It requires collaboration from very many stakeholders, and it requires, keeping the timeline in mind and being realistic. It's interesting because many large companies will tell you that their development process is 24 months. And obviously in pharma, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. But the reason for that is often because they understand the limitations that exist internally
Mm-hmm.
in the organization, and that there is a minimum speed and a maximum speed that the organization can provide as input into that development process.
Going on to our next question, which is, can you walk through an example of a product that had an unexpected challenge during scale up, and how did your team solve it? And this one we can go through pretty quickly.
I can start and try to give you the short version of that. I wish that I could say that we have never experienced something like that, but actually we did experience something with a very recent scale-up demonstration where the customer had a protein extraction liquid that we had to dry for them, and the customer designed the front end process, the liquid phase. And we had to rent equipment to actually prepare the liquid material for the spray drying process. And obviously, so when we started the drying side of the process, the material conveyed it fed to the dryer, it atomized, and it dried, but it did not want to convey out of the drying chamber. So we had to go through all the processes that we normally go through. Why is the product not conveying? Is it the moisture content? Is it the particle size? It's the density of the product. And we just could not figure out why this product was not conveying. And then we went to the next phase, and that is evaluate the liquid specifications of the material. What are the requirements? Is it the pH of the material? Is it the viscosity? Is it the salts concentration? And is it the particle size in the liquid itself? And we found that the liquid handling side of the process was not efficient. So the rented equipment failed. So that's why we had a product that we fed into the dryer that was not the product that we were supposed to dry. And so the customer had to go back and redesign the process. And I want to add here just very briefly that APD just did not step back and say, that is your problem. We can't help you with that. We were very involved with helping them, to look at additional vendors for the equipment, the sizing of the equipment, helping them to design the throughput of the equipment on the liquid handling side. And we are now in an additional phase where they went through the liquid handling process with a different vendor. And now we are back to a phase where we can dry again this product. And now we have a product that we're supposed to have. And hopefully now we can produce a product that's in specification and that we can scale up to full production. So there's always these challenges that you cannot foresee, and that you expect that these things would not be a challenge, and that everybody did their homework and things will work out. But there's always the human factor, and there's also equipment that fails where you're not expected that. I think the most important factor here is that We are a company that's focused on, being successful, supporting customers for whatever that process is, to at the end of the day, have a long-term customer that we can do commercial production for.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest green flag, so to speak, in that whole answer of things is kind of going back to even what Will said before, where there's always some sort of expectation along the way that somehow has to be reassessed and somehow might be broken or somehow might not be met, but needs to be handled. And I was listening to an interview with it's like a CEO of a major company that was talking about hiring, and specifically I think it pertains to this with vendors where you don't necessarily want to work with somebody who does it perfect every single time because they're the best or they're the this or you want to work with somebody who you know for a fact is going to figure out and solve the problem every time. And in a process like this, it sounds like there's almost an infinite amount of variables, but you guys solve the problem. You're not in the business of just saying everything's okay. You're in the business of actually working through it with the customer and then coming out with the best solution that's possible. So that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a really cool way of going about it.
I appreciate that way of thinking, Stephen. And actually, there's two aspects of that. First of all, we exist in a world that has a virtually unlimited amount of detail, and it requires a vast detail orientation to chase down all these variables when you're problem solving. Mm-hmm. And we accept the fact, A, that that's what we need to do, and B, that we have to be 100% transparent about it. Hendrik didn't choose this example because it happened to be equipment that was brought in from the outside and is not part of our factory setup that we use. That's not the point. It's not meant to illustrate that it was, it came in from outdoors, but rather the complexity that we face and the fact that we have to leave no stone unturned. The second thing that I'd like to add to this, though, is that we apply an unusually high level of attention from all tiers of our business, starting with me at the CEO level, all the way through the ranks to every customer. And we give them every bit of attention that we can. And one very recent example of that is, like every manufacturer, we are very frequently subjected to quality audits from all directions. We were notified by one of our very valuable customers who's in the healthcare space that they wanted to exercise their right to audit us, which we love because that keeps us sharp. And they set a date. And so the first thing that I did was I called their CEO and invited him to meet me there and attend the audit with me. I don't think that's something that organizations would normally do, but whatever happened, we felt we were prepared for it. We always feel we're prepared for those things. But I wanted to have the opportunity to spend time with him and his team, his quality team, and give him the opportunity to meet our entire team. He took me up on the offer, as many CEOs do, but it gave us a great chance to allow him to spend more time in the facility, talk about all the opportunities that we have and that we work on together and the future of our business, but allow him to see up close exactly how the product runs, how we maintain emphasis on quality, but make sure that anything that came up in that quality investigation, he heard firsthand. He didn't hear it later from his quality personnel, sanitized, stripped down, in the interest of just giving him a brief report. And that's how we approach everything. We're 100% transparent and open with our customers, whether it's something that happened because we made a mistake or it's something that we couldn't have controlled and we're just reporting it. But it's important to have a partner, whether it's us or someone else, who approaches every engagement the same way, because that's the only way a business is going to be able to have the absolute best commercial result in the market.
That's awesome. That's such a cool way of going about that, and I think it shows through. I'm not surprised, but I think it's a really amazing show of character of what you guys are actually about.
And I think I mentioned previously, collaborative team effort, and that's exactly what I wanted to refer to, is that even though we focus on the process design from a dryer perspective. We look at evaluation of the process. We have the technical guys that make sure that the equipment on our side works and that it's maintained properly and that we have a proper process set up for that. But we also have access to mechanical engineers and chemical engineers. So anything that we have, even if it falls outside of our realm of expertise, we can support the customer. So at the end of the day, we can have a complete process, even though it may include a liquid handling site. That's not normal part of our process, that we can help and support. At the end of the day, we can bring that customer to full commercialization.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So going on to the next question, which we briefly touched on before when we were talking about the start of a process and when people should come to you guys, but what specific documentation and data should a company bring to their meeting with a contract spray drying partner to make the scale-up process as efficient as possible? I think you guys mentioned spec sheets and different aspects, but what are all those different documentation and data points?
I think Will mentioned earlier that confidentiality is extremely important for us because we deal with intellectual property, we deal with customer formulations, we deal with formulations that we help develop for customers. So the first thing that we always focus on is that mutual confidentiality agreement. Additional to that is the customer must have defined objectives and timeframes and expectations. We have the product development questionnaire that we provide to the customer, and we normally request them to complete that questionnaire before we have the first in-depth discussion with them. Because now we have exactly what are the product that we are going to deal with, what is the objectives for that product, what is the delivery system requirements, the regulatory requirements, the time frame requirements, and obviously what are the volume requirements for toll manufacturing. And those are, I would say, the mutual NDA, the onboarding documents from a quality perspective, the vendor qualification. Is there any raw materials involved that needs to be qualified and evaluated? And then the questionnaire that we provide to the customers to help and support them to give us the objectives and the time frame requirements in a structured way so that we can properly plan the process for them and with them.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys have the process so well defined that you're able to help guide people through that in the process when they come to you, which seems like a huge help for especially some brands. So next question being, how do you validate that the powder you produce at commercial scale has the same performance characteristics, solubility, particle size, bioavailability as the original lab batch?
Yeah, that is, I have to think about that a little bit, but normally we don't end up with exactly the same powder properties and characteristic requirements that what we started with during the initial evaluation. What's important is that as we go through the development process and we achieve different objectives with regards to each one of these performance characteristics, whether it's solubility or particle size or bioavailability, it's recorded and it's transparent and it's validated and it's communicated with the customer, and we agreed upon those requirements before we go to the next step. And we will go through that validation and communication and agreed upon process during each one of these stages. So before we go into commercial scale, we know exactly what those requirements are, and we know that it's recorded and it was signed off on a specific document. We agreed upon that's what it is, and we also agreed upon how do we measure for each one of these. What SOP, what procedure do you use to determine solubility? What is the definition of solubility? The same with particle size distribution, density and flowability and all of these aspects. So every time before we go back into a commercial campaign, we will revisit that with the customer and we will reconfirm those specifications and say, yes, these are the ones that we require. Those are still the expectations. And then we know that we have the process parameters, we have the operating procedures so that we can achieve that every time. We know that our dynamic atomization technology is completely scalable and repeatable. So once we have dialed in the process parameters and the right settings, we can achieve that every single time.
Yeah, I was curious to see how Hendrik would answer this question. This is just evidence that we don't rehearse these answers. It's unfiltered and transparent, as I've said before, and it's a perfectly valid answer. My response to the question, honestly, is why would you want necessarily the same powder at the commercial level that you had at the lab scale? And the reason I say that, it's not meant to be a flippant response, but it's simply that you cannot do at the lab scale what you can do with our platform at the commercial scale, whether we're talking about the smallest dryers where we start piloting, we start R&D and then pilot and then larger commercial scale. Because when we transition from the benchtop in the lab into that factory setting, beginning with the R&D scale dryer, the smallest dryer, that's the stage at which we begin particle engineering. It's only at that stage that we can actually start to move toward the ultimate design of the particle the way we've described in some of our discussions prior to this. It's important, very much as Hendrik has pointed out, and as we've talked about before, to understand what is the client trying to achieve. What product are we designing for? What market? What application? What do we need that particle to do? And when we start at the R&D level, in that factory setting, that's when we engineer those particles to optimize for its intended use. At the lab scale, we just can't achieve that. Yeah. We do other things to prepare for it, particularly if we're trying to deploy some of our other technologies. Tesseract's delivery system uses cyclodextrin-based technologies and so on. And so there we're setting the inclusion ratios, we're preparing for the work that's to come at those other levels, and that's very necessary and valuable, but we're not engineering the particle. That comes later. And so we're going to get much greater outcome and effectiveness and the types of things that we can only achieve, once we get to that stage.
It's really interesting because putting it in that light of why would you want it to be that, I think does make a lot of sense, even when you think about when people engineer, physical products or tech products or things like that, where the initial prototype, so to speak, when people think of even just like seeing pictures of the prototype of an invention, it obviously is a lot of times slightly inferior to the end product. And if you think about it almost like that process, that question is one that I think you're right, not many people would actually ask, but is a great way of thinking about it. So with that being said, we'll go on to the next question, which is, what is the cost difference between running small pilot batches versus full commercial production? And at what volume does it typically make sense for a company to commit to a full production run?
Well, Stephen, in the words of our CEO, our value is not in the price, but in the differentiation and the expertise and the value add that we bring. APD, our focus is building long relationships with customers and bringing customers with high-value products with specific and well-defined pilot properties and characteristic requirements. We are not interested in fly-by-nights. We're not interested in just doing one development, going through one development process with a customer or doing one commercial run with a customer. We want to build long-term relationships, and we want to help and support customers to expand their product lines, to add additional SKUs, to add additional markets. So the long-term relationship is not only based on continuous improvement from an operational perspective, but also building that relationship through additional product lines, through additional market development. So those are our focus. So if you think about these type of products that we're dealing with, high value products, the volume ranges of those are very specific, and it may start small and then develop, to larger volumes. And at APD, we have 3 very specific production lines to accommodate for these 3 different levels that we have seen through, the last 20 years. There are typical production volumes for high value products. And again, this could be a startup company, or it could be huge, mature, well-established international companies. So
Do you think that, sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to interject here briefly that, I mean, the basic rules of economies of scale still apply. So the larger the run, the larger the volume a customer is looking to process or purchase, the more economical the price. And what is not consistent across different projects at all is how pronounced that these economies of scale can be, because it depends very much on, for example, is someone just coming to dry a product they already have? Is someone looking for cyclodextrin inclusion? If yes, a small cyclodextrin in the market costs less than a large cyclodextrin, so which goes back to what is the size of the molecule that the customer would like to have included. But ultimately, the basic rules of economies of scale still apply
Mhm.
when you scale it from, the smallest dryer to the largest dryer. So per gram or per kilo, the smallest from benchtop to R&D trial will always be an upfront cost that is absorbed into the more you end up producing, the more you end up selling in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think Stephen Hendrik is giving you the detailed answer, and Uli is giving you the market answer. Everyone wants the numerical answer, right? And that's what we get all the time is how much. And the reality is, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. I'll give you a numerical answer, and I'll give you a qualitative answer, because what really people need to know, whether they're a CEO, a CFO, a project manager, a technical manager, or they're in a meeting with all functions coming together to make a decision, they need to know both, right? Because the decision comes down to the combination of both. The answer is on a pricing curve, which we will help them put both of these together, both the qualitative aspects and the quantitative aspects. That's what we do, and we can help them do it quite quickly. It's not going to be less than 3 to 5x, depending upon the quantity they're talking about. The smaller they go in quantity, the higher that number is going to be. It's more likely going to be 10x if they go really low in quantity. But the price breaks are going to be starting once you get up into the 100 and hundreds of kilos and the 1,000 and thousands of kilos. And Uli has it exactly pinned right there. It's the economy of scale. And our factory allows us to serve clients, so we do not have an MOQ. We are specialists in innovation and helping people create products and bring them to market, which means we suit companies of all sizes. And therefore it comes down to strategy, which is where the quality answer comes in. It absolutely depends. Your question was, at what volume does it make sense for a company to commit? It depends on the market, the application, the strategy, the competition, the growth, the ingredients. It really depends on what their business is trying to achieve. And it depends on whether or not all of these factors will help them piece together the narrative that they want to piece together to have impact on the market. And does the business plan make sense? We are uniquely suited to help them figure that out quickly and cost effectively. That's what we do, and it starts with a conversation. We can usually tell them, Hendrik and I do this every day, and Uli gets involved if it goes beyond that, but we can usually tell them in a couple of conversations if it's going to make sense. And that's why they come to us. That's why they stick with us, and that's why we have clients who are launching products domestically. We have clients who, with us, are creating entirely new SKUs and sets of SKUs that they're rolling out in tens and 50 plus countries around the world very, very quickly. It depends.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I asked the question and I almost just directed it straight to you, Will, because it does warrant almost a numerical answer from that kind of financial sense of things. But I'm almost more satisfied with the answers, the fact that the other two actually answered the other aspects that I wasn't expecting as much first. We have one last question before we wrap up, and that is for companies that are launching a brand new product, how do you help them think about production planning? Things like batch sizes, inventory strategy, and scaling up demand over time.
I think it would be interesting to hear Will's and Uli's perspective on this. I can start by saying that it depends on whether you're dealing with a well-established company that understand their product requirements, the new product requirements, the market that they want to penetrate, and exactly what is the objective with that product, what is going to be the delivery system of that product. If you start with a smaller company or a startup company and they want to develop the market and they're not sure what they want, for any one of these variables, APD can help and support. We see ourselves as a collaborative extension of the R&D side, but also from the sales side of these companies. So during the development process, we would also develop batch sizes. We would, look at the inventory strategy. Are we going to procure the raw materials? Is it contract manufacturing? Is it toll manufacturing? How are we going to support them and help them through this? And then look at the time frame requirements and exactly, are they going to start small or are they going to go to a higher level volumes, right from the beginning? And then how are we going to support them? And Will was mentioning this earlier that, APD has the capacity through, expansions that we did on our capacity or our tolling capacity or drying capacity through the last couple of months. So we know that we can accommodate, each level of requirements that these customers have, whether it's low, intermediate volumes or high volume requirements.
I think one of the important things to keep in mind here is that there are two scenarios. In one scenario, which is probably more the established company who's had a track record of go-to-market strategy and their distribution strategy and the sequence of when they're going to launch either in what channel or in what geographic region. The other one is a little bit more it's not only a brand new product, it might actually be a brand new company. And then, we can help in defining what is that launch strategy. Like, is this an e-commerce play only? And then a year later, you go into brick and mortar retail, or, it's US only. And a year later, you open the European market, and 2 years later, you open the Asian market. So those kind of definition of those strategic parameters, along with, let's say, as firm as possible, making educated projections about the volume you can expect, given is there particular effort on the sales side? Is there a particular effort on the marketing side? Is there, all the wonderful things that we used to call 360 around the launch? What is the education that's being provided? Are there certain events that you need to hit in terms of, do you have a, annual sales meeting where all your sales representatives come and this is the launch date and you need 150,000 of the product available? So all these different elements, all these different parts of what the strategy looks like then helps inform the cadence of the volumes that need to be available. And depending on the industry, that particular customer might want 3 months of inventory on hand, 6 months on hand. When we do cyclodextrin inclusion, our shelf life for these products is 3 years or more, depending on the product. So there might be particular customers that have an appetite for doing 2 years of inventory on hand because it makes them really flexible, really nimble. So I know I'm not really saying what needs to be done for each company specifically, because that's a function of launch strategy, product, markets, and so forth. But all these elements we can discuss and help shape in the conversation with the customer.
Mm.
Yeah. So for a company that's launching a new product, how do we help them think about production planning? I'd say it's very straightforward. Basically, what we do is we help them model their business from the financial perspective of the inputs on that product business model. So the emphasis is on COGS, ingredient production pricing curves, forward thinking, understanding those curves, understanding how those curves change over time, change with scale, change with input variability, change with risk, change with time and pricing, work with us. And we tie it to strategy. What are the different scenarios? How can those input scenarios affect those curves, affect their options, affect their possibilities in the market? Ultimately, the most fundamental value we can give them is that our team is a partner. The people you see here, they have access to. We are proud of the fact that we are sophisticated thinkers, not just a run-of-the-mill spray drying company. Our drying technology is differentiated. We have very unusual and sophisticated IP for delivery technology at the nutrient level, but we have a management and production team that is very attentive to our customers, and we get involved to the level they would like that to support them as a true partner. And many of us have done not just business domestically for decades, but internationally. And we have the reach and the channel and the contacts to help them if that's valuable. And that's, I think, a very key and unusual distinction for many of these partners. Much more valuable for the smaller, younger partners if that's something that can help them launch, grow, get traction. We do that regularly. We spend a lot of time with them. We encourage them to come directly to our factory in Payson, spend time there with us, and interact face to face. Sometimes that's feasible for them. It's not always feasible for them. We still give them lots of time and attention, but the more interaction they can have with the team, the better. And so the support transcends the things that we can do from a factory level, from a technology level, but truly supporting them at the strategic level as well.
And what's interesting about that is that, you guys almost border on, from what I would view from an outside perspective, from other, industries even, you guys almost border on being a consultancy firm or a consulting agency at the same exact time, because you have such a broad spectrum of expertise in the industry. Not that that's necessarily exactly what you guys are, but you have the level of expertise that I think a lot of people would expect out of hiring somebody who's purely a consultant, and you have the level of kind of almost like the 30,000-foot view that a lot of, I think, manufacturing, contract manufacturing, B2B vendors, technically regulated industries don't always necessarily have from a manufacturer, which I think is a really, really interesting aspect that is unique to Advanced Powder Dynamics from an outside perspective.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And to a great extent, we try to provide much of the value that clients would see in that type of relationship, though to a great extent, I resist that label, if only because it sends a signal to clients that it's something they're going to have to pay for. We don't charge for that. Our prices are not cheap though, but it's because we're differentiated in everything we do, and we're working with customers where we're delivering value that we expect follows the products and the things we're creating with those clients into the market and creating differentiated products and goods that should go into the channel and command value for them as well. But what we're really doing is we're investing on the front end to create the strongest possible relationships that have lasting value. And, I think as a testament to that, I hear every day from the CEOs and contacts in these businesses just on a friendly basis or an update, which is very reassuring to me. It's, I think, a reflection of the fact that we are very successful at building relationships with our clients, and they choose to stick with us, to come back to us with new projects. And very recently, one of the most flattering things I heard was during an introduction that one client was making to a new prospective client. He reported that on his first visit to the factory, we didn't know him or his team very well at all, and yet they were greeted by our team, and over the course of the day, they were treated like absolute royalty, which had never happened to them before. And that's the way that we try to treat all of the people we interact with.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I think through these interviews that comes through all these conversations that we're having, and even just through each question that gets answered, I think that comes through. I think that's it for today. This has been a really in-depth conversation about this, but I honestly I've enjoyed this. So unless you guys have anything else to add, I think we'll wrap up.
Looking forward to the next discussion, but I think that's
Yeah,
it for
it should be
today.
fun.
Sweet.
Definitely.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much,
Take care,
Stephen.
guys.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
then
Take care.
bye.